My name is Tom Robbins, and I'm the son of Elizabeth Green. Her father was John Andrews Green. Now, it was 15 decades ago when John Andrews' father, Nicholas Green, built his saltbox house. It was nestled in Winterton, Trinity Bay, Newfoundland. Little did he know that his descendants would decide to gather here today in this quaint fishing village for a very special event. We are celebrating the preservation of this building, what has become known as the Green Family House circa 1870s. Now, included in this event is the reunion of 5 first cousins, the great-grandchildren, all of Nicholas Green, and some of their own children and grandchildren. We Greens come together today, the 16th day of July, 2022, to celebrate the longevity and vitality of our beautiful ancestral home. This all began when Aaron Green, Nicholas's grandfather, came from England 3 centuries ago. Also being honored is the strong character of our ancestors. They were pioneers who were able to live off the newfound land through their knowledge and their craftsmanship, faith, and even their sheer determination. We are here today with local relatives and friends to show appreciation for this unique heritage. Through this event, we wish to convey a very deep appreciation of this inheritance, and for those who have allowed us to thrive and enjoy life in this beautiful world. We actually had these lovely white chairs up here for our VIPs. The VIPs today are the grandchildren of John Andrews Green. Where's Essie? Okay, go man the organ, Essie. Get her pumped up. Essie is Frank's wife, as most of you know. And she's a really good organist and has been involved with the church choir here. She's kindly volunteered to play on a really important instrument that we have here, the pump organ. It was a donation from Jim Marshall and Carolyn, his wife. It's an organ they picked up in Eastport, and they've totally restored it. It has a beautiful sound now, and we thank you so much for donating it to the new summer kitchen and to the house. There used to be a pump organ in this house that our grandmother played. It's now in the museum in Hants Harbor. Yeah. So we're going to do the first and last verse of the Ode to Newfoundland, and Because it is the provincial anthem of Newfoundland, I ask you all to stand. If you're able.
Sun rays crown thy pine-clad hills, and summer spreads her hand. When silvern voices tune thy rills, we love thee, smiling land. We love thee, we love thee, we love thee, smiling land. As loved our forest holy love, where once they should we stand. Their worthy grace to heaven above, God guard thee, Newfoundland. God guard thee, God guard thee, God guard thee, Newfoundland.
Beautiful, thank you so much. Well, we're just doing 2 verses.
She's ready to go.
I know. Yeah. So we're also going to do an invocation today, and we have a special virtual guest, our daughter, Sarah Robbins, and she's going to sing the Lord's Prayer. And she did. This is a recording that we did when she sang it in our church in Florida on Father's Day. So we're proud of our daughter, and we want to share her talent with you today as an invitation. Now we're going to move on with our speakers, and I'm going to lead off to kind of give you more of the overview, and then each of the other speakers are going to give you their specific perspectives on their memories and things about the house as well. In my initial emails, I talked about 150 years, but Gail pointed out this is really a Sesquicentennial celebration. And I had full disclosure here. It's not really 150 years yet, but sometime this decade, in the 20s, it will be. And we don't know which year exactly that Nicholas Green built this house. We do know he was born in 1862, so he would have been only 10 years old if he built it this year. I'm thinking he built it when he was a late teenager. I mean, quite often, young Newfoundlanders would build their houses and for their families when they got married. They got married early. So I do know it's sometime in the 1870s, but we're going to celebrate it anyway, because who knows? We may not be around later in the decade. We have to wait and see. This shows you the tree, the family tree, and where Nicholas Green stands. He's right here. You see he has a lot of brothers and sisters. His father was Jonas Green, married to Teresa Andrews. And we go back to John Green, and we don't know exactly the name of who John Green was married to. Somebody says the first name was Anne, but we're not sure. We don't have that record. Okay. So here's the family portrait that was taken of Nicholas Green and his 4 sons. And there are 2 little girls there as well. We don't know their names anymore, but they were neighbors. I guess obviously very good friends, because they got them all dressed up for this portrait. So our grandfather, John Andrews Green, is right here. And that's his brother Cleophas, the oldest. Then there's Caleb, and then the youngest was Joseph. Now, John Andrews Green married Harriet Holloway, who came from Victoria. She was a Baldwin. And then they had 7 children, actually. 5 survived. The oldest child, John Green, died after about a week and a half. And my mother always described the 2 who died as blue babies. So they probably had some congenital heart disease. So then Robert Bertram, his children are here today, was then the oldest. Helena, who went to the States. My mother, Elizabeth. Maud, who Carolyn is here today. Then they had a Clara, who died, again, a blue baby. And then the youngest was Nicholas, and we have Nicholas's son here too. And that's the family portrait of John Andrews Green and his 5 surviving children. You can see Nick was a lot younger than the others. My mother used to always say, "Oh, I hate to leave home. I've got this little brother and he's so cute and I just don't want to leave." But that's the way it happens. Well, there's John Andrews Green and his lovely wife, Harriet, later on in life. And then they are standing there with their daughter, Lena, in front of the old house. And there's my mother, Lizzie, they called her. There's my Uncle Bert. And that's my father. I guess he was just coming around the first time courting her. So they took a picture. Now, in my family, my 2 older sisters actually spent pretty much a year here in this house. Shortly after Anna was born and Kathy was just 2 years old. My father went away to study and my mother spent the winter here with her family. And this is another picture of my mother holding Anna, the baby. I really show this because it gives you an idea of what the backyard looked like. We had the big store here on the right and the barn back here. There was another building on the very back. It wasn't like that when we came back in 2014. And there's my grandfather holding me in his arms, and my 2 sisters, my mom, and my grandmother. I like the way they all stack their wood again upright. You don't see that anymore. They cut it up and stack it differently now. And that's one of later visits I did. I was getting older then, as my grandmother. A little focus on the house, because this is the old picture we have of the way the house used to look when we started coming as kids. They had already lowered the roof. And that's the back of the house. So when we came, the house was like this. When we bought the house in 2014, Ralph Rowe, who had lived there for more than 50 years, put vinyl siding on it. And I guess the old windows were getting bad. So we put in these smaller windows that were probably a little more windproof. And, you know, it was pretty nice on the inside, pretty decent. Didn't have to do a whole lot. But on the outside, it really bugged me that it never looked like the way it was when we were kids. So we decided to change it back to the way it is today with the old Dory buff paint. That's a Newfoundland historic paint, right, Michelle? Dory buff and ochre red trim. And then in the back, all the old barns had been taken away. There was a small shed. It was in bad shape. So we replaced it with a more functional space that is now serves as, we call it the summer kitchen, because it just gives us a bigger space to be doing things in the summer and entertaining and be out on the Babbling Brook deck. I apologize, the Babbling Brook is not performing very well today. It's because we haven't had rain for like 3 weeks. But we need a good downpour to make it really talk again. Right, not now. So that's kind of a little introduction and perspective of why we're here and what we've been up to. So I've asked Judy now to talk about her memories, coming here as a child and so forth, and looking back. I can advance the slides for you if you like, if you want to hold the microphone.
Yeah. That's my son. He's going to hold the microphone.
Oh, good. Okay.
I got to put him to work.
Who's this son of yours? Nobody knows him.
Yeah. I know him very
Yeah.
well.
Judy had 2 boys, Greg and Robin. They're both fantastic musicians. Greg has really done wonders in Los Angeles with his studio, and now he's doing wonders here in Winterton. We're going to hear more about that as we go along. Yeah.
When I think of my idyllic childhood summers in Winterton, the memories flood back and overpower me with their sweetness and wonderful feelings of adventure. Dad would have a month's holiday, so he and Mom would pack up the 1948 blue Pontiac, which is right there. Sorry, Greg, am I too close?
That's good. You're good. You're doing well.
Okay, with the essentials, and we would head to the East Coast, first from Corner Brook and later from Grand Falls. For the first 2 years, I would be their only backseat passenger, but Daphne joined me then. And 4 years later, me, Glennie, completed the family. No seatbelts then. So one of us would usually be stretched out in the back window taking a nap, right? So comfortable up there, great big back window. We often sang. Mom was a former teacher and a great lover of music and knew many songs. What? You thought the car had a radio? Or heaven forbid, a CD player? The car was loaded onto a flatbed of the train, affectionately known as the Newfie Bullet. The roads between Corner Brook and Gander were far too rough for a car. We rode as far as Clarenville, where we would be met by some of Mom's family, often in the middle of the night, and then head to our grandparents down in the Cove to stay for 2 weeks before moving on to Winterton. I so enjoyed riding the train, usually sleeping on it one night and swinging up and down the aisles. Can you remember that? Swinging up and down the aisles, we put our hands on the edge of the seats. I don't know what people were sitting in thought, and then we just push and jump, and we just go right up, right up, right up, right up. Right up.
I did that too.
Yeah. And this was a much narrower train than you get today on the mainland. So Dad often told the story of how I once went to the side of the train. After we had climbed down the stairs, planted a big kiss on the smoky metal and said, "I love you, train." There were proper roads now for the rest of the trip. I mean, they were gravel. And we were soon heading to Trinity Bay in Winterton in our Pontiac. because we knew no different. We weren't bothered by the dust or the mud, all part of the journey and the adventure for a child. My earliest memories of Winterton are of the house and the brook, the delightful brook that still babbles constantly on its way from the hills to the sea. I watched the adults dip buckets into the water, then carry 2 at a time using a hook to keep the buckets away from their bodies to avoid much spilling of the water. We got pictures up. Yeah, wasn't that something? I mean, that was really good thinking, you know, way back. And somebody had to invent it, didn't they?
More technology.
Yeah. The water would be poured into the wooden barrel in the back porch and then used for drinking. And there was usually a dipper or old saucepan or something like that. It would also be used for washing dishes, cooking, laundry. There were no taps to turn on, for instance, hot or cold water. Every bedroom had a pitcher of water and a big bowl for personal washing. Imagine washing your face on a winter morning in icy cold water. My grandfather spent his days in his shop right next to the house. Now I realize it was at the front of the house because there would be no room for it at the side because called the creek or the brook, excuse me. Many people had shops spaced along the road where you could buy a variety of essential things. There were not many cars, so people didn't have far to walk for scrub brush or whatever. I remember a bigger shop owned by E.J. Green that carried much more merchandise than other places. Now, just up the road, Aunt Lizzie Green sold hot dogs and pop from her porch. Anybody remember that? No? Yeah, and well, she sold other things, but I just remember the hot dogs with pop.
Yeah, me too.
My delight was to meet my grandfather mid-morning on the steps of his shop. We would share an apple. We'd split an apple or an orange or whatever. I'm sure he had the knife. Okay, so my grandparents' house, the very one we're celebrating 150 years of being in existence, was in my child's view a very spacious place. Lots of bedrooms for us all to sleep. I loved climbing the stairs and then choosing which way to turn. And I'm so happy they haven't changed in all this time. There's no bathroom. The room was just another bedroom. No bathroom, yikes. There was a special porcelain pot under every bed, or probably a tin pot. Would it be? It could be either or. Probably the forerunner of today's ensuite. Even though we had full bathrooms, Corner Brook, Grand Falls, we never questioned the lack of them here and thought it interesting that we could walk up the yard to the double outhouse. I think it was a two-door
outhouse.
During the day. I had no memory of ever having a bath in Winterton. No memory at all. We certainly didn't in the icy ocean or the brook, but Mom, with her very strong sense of smell, right? Yeah. Must have found a way to keep us clean. We did survive without a daily shower, believe it or not. All of the houses and property were enclosed by fences and shut gates, not to keep the animals in, but to keep them out. Sheep and horse, and I know I can hear you just agree with me. So many of you remember this. All of the houses and property were, okay, I just said that. Sheep and horses wandered freely along the road and on the various pieces of empty land. They would not have been welcome to feast from the vegetable gardens, nor to leave behind any piles of you-know-what. Children had absolute freedom to go wherever we wanted. I often wandered down to the water to one of the stages where the fishermen were working to see if somebody would let me take a dory out to row around the harbor. My parents didn't keep track of us. They figured that our stomachs would bring us home at mealtime. But I'm sure someone kept an eye on us wherever we wandered, especially by the water. What is the saying? Something about it takes a village to raise a child. Cousins. There we are. Do you remember the wooden home built? The wooden home built wheelbarrows? There's one now right out there in the driveway that we were allowed to play with. How about getting 5 cents from Grandma to go to Nat Hiscock's little shop across the road to buy 1 wiener if we were hungry? I did that about every single day I was there. And the beautiful front door of the house with the panels of red glass that brightened up the hall when the sun shone through. Then there was the time that a hush came over the town. One of Grandfather's brothers, Uncle Cleophas, wandered away. He had dementia, and search parties were formed to find him. He had fallen between some rocks and had died before before he was found. I remember this. I remember people talking about, that's what they were doing. Of course, the children weren't allowed to attend the funeral. So to us, it was a normal day and we played outside. You'd be there too. I remember running down from the meadow, screeching with laughter as some of the cousins chased me. Mom rushed outside and said, "Please, we have to be quiet. It's Uncle Cleve's funeral day." Then there was the time I returned from squid jigging. One of the fishermen, either an Andrews or a Hiscock, would let me tag along in the big boat. What thrill to get out of the sea with several adults. I wore a black rubber coat and a big hat to protect myself from the stinky black liquid that a squid squirts when it's pulled out of the water. Happily wandering home at twilight and coming through the gate to the back door, I was met by my grandmother. She spoke sternly to me in an accent I can't hope to duplicate. Granny, you probably could do it. But anyway, she said, "Don't think you're coming in this house dressed in those filthy clothes. Take everything off of the lane before you put 1 foot in the door." I bet I had a bath that night. I could go on and on, but it's time to wind down. Just a few short stories left. I desperately wanted a little boat to play with here ahead of the game. I wanted a little boat so much because they had this gorgeous boat that was built for Bobby Hyatt, but it was left here, and you were allowed to play with it, sure. So I found a piece of wood and asked my grandfather to cut me a basic shape so that I could put a little mast and sail on it. His reaction was so surprising. "Judy, I won't do that. Girls don't play with boats." That was that. Of course, we were expected to go to church. After all, my dad was a minister, my grandfather a lay preacher. A good way to entertain myself was to count the pipes on the organ. What a magnificent instrument it was, and it still is. It seemed to occupy the whole front of the church, and there was lots of action on the left-hand side, as a volunteer was needed to turn a crank to bring the air into the bellows, right, into the organ bellows. So the sound would come out when it was being played. This was usually the job of one of the teenage boys in the congregation. I understand that Grant Tucker was one, and I just learned that Walter was one too. Just think, Grant, you were there, and I was watching you, but we never met until we were in our 70s. My last memory, I gotta really try to control myself here. My last memory is a smell. When it rains and I go outside where I live now in Toronto and breathe in the scent of wet wood or garden mulch, I am transported back to my grandparents' home. But the ever-present odor of the woodshed or the fresh smell of newly cut wood on the woodpile, I smile, I take a deep breath, and remember those wonderful days.
Okay, thank you, Judy. That was absolutely wonderful. Great memories. So, Carolyn, you're up.
Greg did such a good job of holding the mic. Judy was asking if he'd do the same for me. I'm loud enough anyway.
All right.
My body's made Carolyn.
Mhm.
Mom was number 4
So,
child of John
You
and
got
Harriet
Grant's
Green.
talk next?
My first memory of Winterton was in the summer of 1953, 54. I was 7, 8 years old. My family had arrived in our first car from Badger, Newfoundland, where we were living then, to live in Bay Roberts. It was the first trip to Winterton to visit our grandparents in quite a while. So I was all excited. I heard a knock on the back door. Mom said, "Go answer, Carolyn," which I did. Standing there was George, Betty, and Norma. "Can we play with him?" I said, "What? Can we play with him?" And Mom came up. She said, "They want you to go outside and, play." So she said, "Put your sweater on and go on." So off I went. Out we came. So we stood, sized each other up. And I think it was, I said, "What are we going to play?" George says, "Let's play Bucky Nighton." I said, "What? Bucky Nighton." He said, "Oh, Bucky, he-eyed." Didn't take me long to figure it out. And we were wonderful friends. Did you know Uncle Joe, grandfather's brother, had a grocery hardware store over Harbor? Anyway, I found out that not only a good, grocery operator, but he was a bit of a magic man. And I had a seedy old wart on the back of my hand. George says, "He'll fix that for you." So off we went to visit Uncle Joe. George proceeded to tell him what was wrong with me. "Yes," he said, "I'll look after that." So he said he took off, looked back, and I came back in a few minutes, and he said, "Stand up there now, put your hand behind your back." So I listened to him, and I felt him rub something over it, and then he wrapped it up in a piece of cloth, and he said, "You keep that on now, my maid, for a couple of days and come back and see me, and we'll see how it's doing." So I did, and Mom didn't say anything, and so I said, "Okay." So I went back to see Uncle Joe in a couple of days, and he took it off. The wart was gone, never ever came back. So he was my hero. Did you know best blackberries grow on the hill up there by the Anglican church? Not the church, the cemetery. And they got ripe before the blueberries and the partridge berries. So grandmother would give us a bucket to go up on the hill. So off we went with George and Betty and probably Norma too. And but grandma, as we were leaving, she said, "Don't pick the blueberries in the cemetery." Not blueberries, blackberries. Well, the first one to go in over the fence was George. Picked the berries in the cemetery. So we all did, but we never told anybody. And grandmother made the pie, the pudding, and had the molasses sauce for it. And we never ever got found out for that one. Did you know I sold beer at Uncle Newman's store when I was 12, 13 years old? Sometimes Betty had to help out on cash on Saturdays. Eileen, you might have too. There was a separate area for beer and a cash register. So she showed me how to work it. And we had put the amount of money in the till and put the numbers, the $8.95. No, how much was beer then? $4, $3? I don't know. And put it in, pull the handle, and the cash register would open up, and we put in and make change. I wasn't good at making change, but I got there. And I said, little did Uncle Newman know that I was getting practice for working in Canadian Tire on cash many years later. Did you know our grandfather taught us several words on our summer visits, and we cousins never forgot. And he taught us, like, I was here like one weekend, and Judy and Daphne were probably here next month, and Tom was probably, you know, another time. But we all learn these words. Okay, so Judy, Daphne, Tom, join me. Spell Bacaloo. Bacalieu. Okay, another one, harder one. Czechoslovakia.
Czechoslovakia. He taught me that one.
Did you know there was Tom told you earlier that there was an organ in grandmother's house, just like that one in there. And I was taking piano lessons in school at that time. And I'm not looking for an interview or an audition for over here. I found a music book, and there was a few songs in there, and there was a little ditty in there that grandfather kind of liked the music. So it went like this. My wife and I lived all alone in a little log hut we called our own. She loved gin and I loved rum. Tell you where we had some fun. Ha ha ha, you and me, little brown jug, don't I love thee? Ha ha ha, you and me, little brown jug, don't I love thee? And he, with his stick, because he had a bad foot, he would be hopping around in the living room. And you know what? I don't think that he ever knew what was supposed to be in that jug, because he never drank in his life.
You know.
Yeah. My most treasured memory is the family letter. When her grandfather, John, died, Uncle Bert came up with a brilliant idea. He wrote a letter telling the news of his family, what was going on with the kids, and sent it on to Uncle Nick. And he said to Uncle Nick, now read my letter, write one of your own, and pass it on to Aunt Lena, who was living in the States at the time. And he did, and it came around, and by the time it got from Uncle Bert, Uncle Nick, Aunt Lena, and us, Mom and grandmother was living with us most of the time. There was 5 letters, so everybody read the letter, and it got back to Uncle Bert. So he took out his old letter and threw it away, read all the letters from the family. I forgot you. I knew I forgot somebody. Uncle.
You're getting in trouble there.
And so this is the way the family letter started. And that went on for over 10 years. And it was wonderful because we got snapshots sometimes. It kept us in touch with all the cousins and aunts and uncles. And it worked wonderfully. And I believe that that family letter led to us all being here today. Because it was so easy happens in families. And of course, there was no Wi-Fi, no Facebook or anything then. It was only by letters and pictures. So thank you, Tom, for bringing us all together here today and remembering all things of our family. And thank you all for listening.
The last
Thanks, Greg.
grandchild to talk will be John Anders. John Anders Jr., I guess.
Yeah.
We also have, besides the 5 grandchildren, we have 3 great-grandchildren. Greg Wells, Judy's son, Ben Angus, my sister's son, Roma. Where's Ben? Is he here? Yeah, there he is.
Yeah,
And my son, Philip Robbins.
that's right.
And yeah, so 3 great-grandchildren. And Tom Anders Green has 2 great-grandchildren here in Winterton. I don't see them here right now.
They're out in the truck.
They're out in the truck, are they? Okay. Someday they'll catch on that, you know, family history is important. Okay. So now we're going to have John Anders Green
Okay.
from British Columbia,
Yes,
all the way.
thank you.
You can spell John Andrews Green there.
Yeah.
I have very few memories of this house and of Winterton because we live so far away. The only time I remember coming, the house had been sold and both my grandparents had died. So I'm really glad to be here to hear these other stories. The time I did come in 1970, we went on a great adventure fishing one day. So that was exciting to go out with the fishermen, and they hauled in a load of fish from one of the nets. So I saw that. The other thing we did scared the hell out of me. And what that was, and someone should warn a kid before taking them to a cemetery. But we went up to the family cemetery, and I'm 10 years old, and I see my name on a gravestone. The whole entire name. That was like a memento mori for me, with Mori in all capital letters. You see that. So my father, Nicholas Green, Nicholas Rayfield Green, he was born June 1930 in this house. Not exactly sure of the date. It was either June 6th or June 15th. His birth certificate said one thing and his mother said another. And he was quite sure that his mother would know the date of his birth, but he didn't say that with full confidence, I don't think. He didn't seem completely confident about that. So the memories I want to share are basically stories that my dad told about this place. And I asked him once, I said, with all the waterfront around here, why didn't you guys build your houses closer to the water where you could take in the view and be close to the beach? And he says, we were just trying to keep warm. He says, get away a bit from the wind and from the weather. And so they had chores like carrying and cutting the firewood. And he told me that his grandfather, Nicholas Green, as well, would sit by the fire at night until it was completely and 100% out before he would go up to bed, just to make sure that everything was safe. And I heard stories they would get a beach stone. I don't know how big. I wonder if someone can tell me how big these stones were. But they would warm them up by the wood stove, and then they would take them up to their bed and put them in the bed to warm the bed up a little bit.
Half as big as your head.
Okay, there we go. Then this part would make he said, then in the middle of the night when the stone got cold, you could hear someone had pushed it out of the bed go thump on the floor. By the time my father got up in the morning, it would be so cold in the house, and someone had started the wood stove by then, but he would grab his clothes in his bedroom, just a few hooks, no closet or anything like that, just a few hooks with his clothes hanging on, and he would run down and get dressed in front of the wood stove just to be a little bit warm. Speaking of clothing, in one closet, he said all the men had one suit. They only had one suit, serge suit, and they would wear that. Some of the pictures have, I don't know if I have any of the suits here. They've got the serge suit, and when they died in it, when they died, and they were dressed in it for their burial, if it no longer fit, they would cut it up the back so that it would do up in the front, so that they would look decent and respectable. Some of the stories he told made me realize how many things I take for granted. He always seemed like he was a generation or two or three older than my friends' parents. But living here in Winterton was a hard and difficult life at times. And he would talk about the long and hungry month of March. No roads in, no roads out. So they had to wait for the schooners to come in to bring food, and they couldn't come until the ice had broken up, or I'm not sure what exactly it looked like, but they couldn't come in until the end of March. He said the tomatoes by this time from the root cellar were pretty awful. And so the long and hungry month of March. Electricity, take for granted. He remembers getting electricity. It didn't make much difference because he said, it's just a few wires hanging down from the roof with a socket and a light bulb. So it was just lighting at first was all they used. Entertainment, we're so used to having entertainment at the click of a button. And I imagine they had wonderful entertainment here that was live, but they didn't have all the things I take for granted. And he remembers an uncle getting a radio. And this uncle would open the window, and other folks would gather around outside and listen to the radio. And one of the times, might have been the first time, I can't remember, that my father was listening outside, out the window, he heard that World War II was over. And so as he was walking back home, he was telling the first person he saw, World War II is over. And the fellow says, you're just a kid. What do you know? I think my father told me that a number of times as well. Entertainment was a family herald, the only newspaper that he remembers. And at first his father would read it to him. So that was entertainment, just listening to this. And then he would read it for himself. After they were done with the family herald, it went out to the outhouse for toilet paper. And my father says, Family Herald wasn't too bad, but the Eaton's catalog was awful.
Too glossy.
My father had he had an interesting thing about his brandy. He loved his brandy, but it had some medicinal aspect to it. And he told me that his grandfather or whoever, if they had a toothache, they would take some brandy. But because they weren't drinkers, they would just swish it around and spit it out. And my father did not get this spitting it out part of it. So he would drink it. But it wasn't just a drink he enjoyed. It was something that cured everything, it seemed. You know, if you got a cold, well, let me make you a hot toddy. No matter what the case, brandy always seemed to be the cure for it. And one day we were living in Edmonton, and he came up to visit. And we never had much alcohol in our house. And he opens the cupboard and he pulls out a bottle of brandy. And I look at him and think, I don't remember having that there. Says, I left it here last time. I figured it would be safe here. A couple of stories about church. My dad didn't say a lot of positive things about the church, but John Andrews, there's a picture of his Bible. I inherited my grandfather's Bible, and it was dedicated to him by the Winterton congregation for being a lay reader and a lay preacher. But one of the times I saw my dad express pain on his face was when he was talking about his grandfather. And his grandfather couldn't quit smoking tobacco, but you could not be a Christian and smoke. So he was called a backslider and he was excluded. And just to see the pain on my father's face with that story about being excluded and shut out was really struck him quite strong. Now, this sounds like a positive story, but only half of it. His sisters used to dress him up for church. The other half, he didn't like it very much. That's that whole story. And then when he went to Corner Brook, Judy and Daphne, I think, used to harass him a little bit. The other thing is my grandfather, John Andrews Green, would only shave on Saturday nights. He would, in order, so we'd be all ready for church the next day, he would shave on Saturday night, but every once in a while he didn't get around to shaving for one reason or another, didn't feel well or something. I forgot all about the pictures, but
Yeah,
and so he would go to church unshaven and just a mess. So, well, why don't you shave Sunday morning? He says, well, it says in the Bible that you cannot shave on a Sunday. And one day, Uncle Matt handed him a Bible. Matt LeGros handed him a Bible and says, show me. So I don't think he had an answer for that. But my inheritance was from my grandfather was a Bible and a gold coin. And I was about 5 or 6 years old when I got this. He died 2 years before I was born. Well, I guess I got this when my grandmother had died. So I got this Bible and a gold, it's a gold sovereign. And I was impressed with the gold coin. I thought, that's where the money is, in the gold. And that's what I was impressed about. But I came to very much appreciate the Bible. For it tells us about the mystery and wonder of something greater than us that unites all of us. And to be open to the awe and wonder and to live with grace and gratitude is something that I treasure very much. I forget where I was going to end here. Okay, I got the nickname Skip. Everyone my family, everyone calls me Skip. And because my grandfather was called Skipper John when he was getting ready to launch the boats or something like this. Some people here may know more of this story, but he was given orders and he was telling people what to do and how to do it. And so, aye, Skipper, and they started calling him Skipper John. So when I was 2 months old, my father came home and called me Skipper John. And I have 2 older sisters, and they never called me anything but since then. They got just shortened to Skip. So that's where I got that from. When my father was born here, I got this from Uncle Bert's biography that I think he wrote out by hand. And I think Bill Wells typed it up. When my father was born, Uncle Bert comes home after university or something like that. And his parents say, "We have a surprise for you." They take him in and it's little baby brother. I thought, well, that's quite something. They didn't tell him. They were expecting a child. But, my father did not say a lot about his father. I got the impression at times that the relationship was strained. But he told me one day, and he didn't tell me this till I was a little bit older because he didn't want me to learn anything from this story. But one day he was having an argument with his dad and he was just giving it back to him, my father giving it back to his dad. And my grandfather walked with a cane and he had this cane. And so my dad would just give it to him and he'd take a couple steps back to be out of reach of the cane. And he would give it back some more and, take another step back. And this went on for a little bit. And I love the way it ended. He said, my dad just sat down on the ground and started laughing. And later in life, I know that he regretted a little bit not coming back to Winterton. It was always a place that meant a lot to him. It was always special. He was always a Newfoundlander, even though my mother was from Saskatchewan. I was born in Ontario. We moved out to the West Coast in 1965, but you could just always see that love of Newfoundland in him. And so he had regrets at time that he didn't come back here and settle. He didn't mention that often, but he mentioned that later in life. So those are the memories that my dad shared with me that I heard. So thank you very much.
Two stories.
Okay.
Okay, so the one is, everybody went to church, and your dad your dad was babysitting me.
Okay.
And I started to scream and yell and I was just a little baby. And he knew he wasn't supposed to pick me up. But he picked me up. And it was just so,
Yeah.
it was so good. He would always tell me that story. And the other one was, he came home, he was maybe 12 or 13, and he had this round thing in his hand. And it was red. And he found it in the store. And he brought it home to show his mother. And what you got there, Nick? What you got there? I don't know. It just arrived in the store. I think they call it a tomato.
All right, thank you, Skip. Thank you, Judy. Great stories. Thank you, Skip. Thank you, Judy. Great stories.
Okay, so now we're going to switch to our other cousins who have memories as well of this neighborhood because they continue to live here. We're going to start with Frank Green. Frank, come up and share a few memories of your growing up here.
My story starts with when Thurza Andrews married Jonas Green. Yes, okay. They had 2 sons, Aaron and Nicholas. Aaron had my father, Jonas, and Nicholas was father to Uncle John. They say Thurza was a strong, hard-working, and even hard-headed woman. After she married Jonas, there was some dispute about a piece of land she was supposed to own over at the Andrew Stage area. Some people thought that because she married Jonas Green, that she was no longer entitled to the land. It said that one day there was a bit of fuss over the land. She grabbed a pitchfork and stood on the land and said, "The first man to stand and take my land would know what the other end of this pitchfork will feel like." She kept the land. Later on in her older life, as she lay dying, the family was gathered in the house. She had been sick for some time and was expected to pass on. Suddenly, there was a noise as if someone was coming downstairs. When they went to investigate, it was her. She got down, went to the front room, and died there. She wanted to die with her boots up. Thursday's son, Aaron, was my grandfather, was born in 1864 and passed in 1936. I was only 1 year old when he passed, so obviously I don't remember him. However, among many of the stories I was told about him was about the occasion of his passing. Being a fisherman, of course, when morning came, it was custom to check the fish nets. On this particular day, the net hit 2 extra salmon. So he decided to take one of them down to his daughter, Liddy, in Hansard. He walked to Liddy's house in Hansard with the salmon and stayed there long enough to have his lunch. Walked back to Winterton. That night, he suffered a major heart attack and passed on. Grandmother Amy Downey lived with my family until her death in 1946. She was bedridden for 8 years, and during that time, she was tended by my mother. Her son Jonas, of course, was my father, born in 1893 and passed in 1971. Was both fisherman and blacksmith. I remember him fishing in a 16-foot dory called a rodden. It did not have a motor. You had to use the paddles to get to the fishing ground, which could be very difficult when the wind was blowing. Occasionally I would go with him squid jigging. And then in the fall of the year, my father was a blacksmith. He made horseshoes in the forge across the road from our house, which at the time was at the bottom of Greens Hill. I lived next door to Uncle John. 2 of Uncle John's brothers lived in big houses on the same side of the forge across the street. There was also a large building where father and brother built boats. When you drive along there today, you wonder how there was enough room for all that on that side of the road. I remember getting up in the mornings and watching the boats being built while my father was working in the forge. I could still hear the sound of the hammer striking the anvil as he was shaping the shoes. At the first fall of snow, the horses would be lined up waiting for their shoes, usually 8 to 10 at a time. He shod horses from New Perlican all the way down the shore. It was very, very hard work. We had 2 horses in the barn, my father and his brothers. I remember one winter night when we were about to go to bed, there was a loud noise outside. My father said that noise is coming from the barn. He went outside to the barn, and when he came back, he said to my mother, "I have quite a job on my hands tonight." He had put the new shoes on the horses that day. While in the barn, one horse broke loose in her stall. It came out of the stall and stepped on another one that was lying down. And of course, the shoes made a puncture wound and tore the flesh in several places. He had to stitch all this up. One injury was quite severe, so he reached for the disinfectant, my mother's white sewing thread, sewing needles, and a long white gold feather. He sterilized the needles, grabbed the lantern, and hid it to the barn. He used a gold feather and disinfectant to clean the wound before stitching. He was in the barn most of the night. Sometime after he took the stitches out, everything had healed perfectly, but it was quite a lot. I also remember one night being awakened by a loud knock at the door. Someone called out, "Jonas, my horse is sick. I think he's got a colic. Can you come over and have a look?" Father went and tended to the horse with remedies he found in the veterinarian books. He read every vet book he could get his hands on. And his favorite surgical tool was a straight shaving razor. He used it for shaving castrating animals. He also used it one time to remove a large fish from Otto Duggar's hand. Uncle John had a shop in front of the house, which was next door to ours. I remember in the fall of the year, he would have a barrel of apples come to sell. We could always tell when the apples arrived because when we got out of school, we could smell the apples in the air long before we reached the shop. I remember being very excited at Christmas time when Uncle John would begin putting decorations in the shop window. I would stand on the steps of the shop and look at those toys through the front window. And on Christmas morning, there would always be an apple in my sock, along with chocolate bar, scribbler, and a toy from Uncle John's window. And that's it. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, Frank. Okay, and last relative cousin, the famous Melvin Green. Melvin,
He doesn't need any notes.
you don't need no.
Well, I
Yeah.
don't have any.
Put a
I'll
guitar-
soon, I'll soon find out if I need any.
Put a guitar in his hand, he can talk forever. Great job, Frank.
Frank covered all, well, I don't need any notes. Frank covered our family really well.
So we're on the Aaron branch of the family, and Nicholas built here, and his brother Aaron built there, where that house is now. And my grandfather built this house, Uncle Luther, which I call Pep, and Nan, which everybody called Aunt Liz or Aunt Elizabeth. They built that house there. So I was born in that house, spent my early years in that house and in this environment, which was a wonderful place to be, very secure. We didn't know very much about the outside world at all. I remember being so happy and contented. And when I think back, we all lived very close together. I can't remember any problems where there was a bracket between this one and that one. Do you, Frank?
No.
No. So it was a wonderful place to grow up. Now, my father, when our family started here, 3 of us were born. So he had to find somewhere to live. So you couldn't expand into the midder. And the midder is the meadow, of course. You couldn't expand there because the land was so valuable. Everything here was to feed us and to feed the animals. So my father purchased some land from the Tuckers, right in on the back, and your brother Aaron went on the back up here. So we had to go right on past the midder to build our house. So I spent the rest of my years in there, still having the brook, still by the brook, Clark's Pond Brook, same brook here. And we had to establish our well. We had a well in there. I remember well the coming out of here, the path came through here, and there was a gate there. And the path to the well, our well here was inside the fence. And we just simply walked through Uncle John's garden. I remember the path. Everywhere else in the garden was grass, but the path to the well was worn down. There was no sod left. There was no gravel left. It was rocks. Because multiple times during the day, you had to go to that well for water, back and forth. 3 houses, well, 4 houses if you count Irene's house on the other side there. That's Uncle Caleb's daughter lived on the other side. So everybody was going back and forth to the well with the buckets and the hoop, which we called a hope. And other well here just below, the Hiscocks kept their fence back from the brook so that all the other people could come up here to the well here. So that was more like a community well right here. And they would use the buckets in the hoop. And some of them would have a wheelbarrow, something like that, but with a round hole in the middle of the wheelbarrow to drop in the water barrel. And they would actually wheel up, full it up there, and then wheel the water home. I remember a lot of people down around the harbor, even the people who lived by the brook down around the harbor, didn't use the water down there. I guess they thought about the outhouses and the piles of manure in our stables and all this up here. So they had the good sense to come up here and get their water. It seems that before Nicholas and Aaron built here, it seems like all the previous settlers were on the other side of the road. I was wondering about that, but I asked Frank the other day, I said, do you know anything about that? Was this the meadow here as well? Was this the midder? This was their garden and no one lived here. And he said, well, my father always said that, welcome boys.
That's the great.
That's the great-great-grandchildren.
Great-grandchildren.
Well, you're some lucky. You just got the last part of my speech. So I'm glad you came in. What was I saying? Yes, Frank said his father always said that he was born, he was living here, of course. He always said, I was born on the other side of the road. So to me, that means that he was born in his grandfather's house, same as I was, and they moved over here after their family started. So it seems like Jonas and Thurzer would have lived over there, and I would imagine the previous John and Anne possibly lived over there too. And of course, that's where the forge was.
Yeah.
And I was delighted to see a photo of the big store. We call it the big store out by the road. And the road was so narrow then, if the store was still there, it would be on the yellow line now. The big store beside the road was the boat building store. It was long, quite long, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah.
And just wide enough that you could have a boat in the middle and work on the sides. Great big long store with double doors in the end. There's an excellent photo there. Somebody has of it. And I remember being in there and seeing the different shapes of the timber and all this where they would be building boats. I could not remember a boat there. So I asked Frank, and I was delighted to hear him say, yes, I remember boats being in there being built. And he said, I remember there were two. At one point, there were two boats in that store being built. You notice we call it a store, not a shed. We never used the word shed. We do now, but it was always a store. And of course, the shop was the shop, not the store. So that was the boat building store. And I have something that would have been hanging in that store. Not only back to my great grandfather Aaron, but back to the beginning. As a matter of fact, I think these instruments, this piece of technology, Jerome, I'm sure, is going to talk about this, but I thought I'd bring this to show because this would have been in the shed, and it just looks like three pieces of stick. Many of these got thrown away, chopped up and burned and everything else, but it doesn't look like anything, right? 3 pieces of stick. But this is technology. This is technology. It was brought over when they came over. They wouldn't have come across. The first settlers wouldn't have come without this because they came to fish, and you can't fish without a boat. So everybody had to build a boat. And in this area here was a punt. They would have to build a punt to go out and catch the fish. They would certainly bring this. This is what they call the boat modes. And with this, you can get the shape. Now a boat has a different shape here, here, here. Every piece of timber, which is the ribs, they call it timber. is a different shape. And of course, the shape of the boat was critical because you had to be able to go out there and win and so on, and she had to bring in a load of fish and so on. So the shape was critical, but this guaranteed that the shape was going to be right. Tested for hundreds and hundreds of years. Jerome, I'm sorry, I hope I'm not stealing any of your thunder. But it's not just 3 business things. On these pieces are all kinds of markings. You may not see them there, but everything is marked all the way. And this is, you can see, you begin to see the side of the shape of the boat. And this one has markings. This one has markings. So this got every single shape that you needed for your boat, depending on how and where you put it. There's a boat, and it's guaranteed to be a boat that is seaworthy because it was tested for hundreds of years. So I wanted to talk about the boat shed, so I thought I'd bring that along. The forge, my favorite spot, believe it or not, over on the other side of the road, was not the boat shed. I don't spend a lot of time in there, but the forge, I was fascinated by the forge. To go in there, and I can see Uncle Jonas now, with one hand up on the bellows, and the other holding the iron into the fire, blowing up the fire, taking the red hot iron and pounding it and shaping it to whatever he was making. I could watch him for hours, and if you were okay and kept quiet, you'd be allowed to stay there for a while. This was it, because if he wanted you to go, he was able to tell you to go. Wasn't he? There was no mistake. There was no mistake. So I wasn't there this day because I never commented. I just wanted to stay. It was quiet. But there were several boys in there one day. I don't know who they were. Perhaps it was Grant. Because they were tormented. Several boys in there one day. And Uncle Jonas was over doing the force thing, and they were there. And all of a sudden, they started fooling around. And they started throwing chips at each other. Chips that picked up off the floor and flicking and so on. So it started to get on his nerves. So finally, he turned around with the big voice he had. And he said, okay, if you was just going to throw in chips, I'm going to throw in adzes. An adze is a great big tool, something like an axe curved. He said, if you're just going to throw in chips, I'm going to throw in adzes. So I think they settled down pretty good. I have great memories of, I was going to say that it was mentioned that Uncle Joe and Uncle Clee lived over there. And of course, Uncle Kip, Uncle Caleb, he moved further up expanded further up the hill, and his house is still there. And 2 of his sons built houses right there. They're still there, not in the Green family. I remember Uncle Clee's house. It had the traditional shape, the steep roof still, and it had the wooden shingles still. And whereas Uncle Joe's had been changed, the roof had been changed to look more like this one and that one. I was wondering if that would have been the original house, Uncle Clee's house. But we don't know. I wonder if it would be. But I was going to say, I've got wonderful memories of the knitter. When we moved in there, we would walk back and forth. We hardly ever used the Tucker's Lane, which wasn't a road then. You couldn't drive in there. There was no road to our house. You walked in. Or you rode in on the horse in the winter on the sleigh or on the cart and so on. But we walked through. There was a footpath going through the knitter, and everybody shared the knitter, and it wasn't separated from generation to generation. Because usually land is every generation is divided, and this one gets this and this one gets that and so on. The knitter was never separated, never fenced in. Everybody had an understanding that. Okay, you cut the grass there, and we're grow our potatoes here. You cut the grass there, and so on. And can't remember any of the schools. Everybody helped to keep the perimeter fenced in, of course. But great memories of the knitter, especially up in the what we call the grove. There was a grove of birch, is still kind of in there, and we would go there as young boys. with your pocket knife. And if you wanted to make a slingshot, you go and cut your Y stick for that to make the slingshot. Or to make a bow and arrow, you cut your little piece of birch there and so on. So that was a favorite place of ours up in there, to go up in the birch. Go up in the birch. I was going to tell my earliest memory of Uncle John A. And somebody kind of hinted at it. You guys had the story, but I'll tell my part of it very briefly. We're out in the brook one day, down here by the shop. Where the shop was, the brook kind of widened there before it entered. It went under the bridge, and we would go down there sailing boats. They made boats for me, Judy. Chop them out, all you do mast. They take their axe and chop it out, and they put the mast in her and the bit of shopping money from John's store, tie on, we sell boats there. So one day he came out of the store. I don't even remember who was there. The store. I guess it was there, so people just wanted to come outside. He came outside and he walked down to the room. He started talking to us, and he started asking us how to spell words. And the way we must have been going to school for a year or two. So first of all, I asked simple words like, do you know how to spell a cat? You know, we said, yes, T-A-T, cat. Yeah. Then he said, and you know what it's going to be. Do you know how to spell Czechoslovakia? And we said, what? We didn't know what it was. No clue what it was. Czechoslovakia. And we said, no, we can't spell that. And he said, do you think I can spell that? And we said, no, I don't think anybody can spell that. And he said, yes, I'll spell it for you. Now he had his hand in his pocket and he took it out like that. And he kind of held his hand back on to us like that. And he spelled Czechoslovakia. And we said, oh, you got it wrote down. You're reading it off, right? And he laughed and he showed us something that he took out of his pocket. All you older people should be able to tell me what it was.
Pocket knife.
Pocket knife, yeah.
Everybody always had a pocket knife. No.
On the twine.
No. A box of matches. Remember the box of matches with Czechoslovakia wrote on them? For years. There's the secret. See, I have the secret. And every time, he didn't know how to spell it either. He had that in his hand every time he spelled it. He had it memorized. And he made you for this learning, but he didn't know how to spell it. He had a box of matches like that.
We never forgot.
For years, I thought Czechoslovakia was matches. And one day in school, we were doing geography, and I saw the country. There's a country. A country right full of matches. I don't know why I remember that, but that's a memory that came to me when I said, I think I'm finished. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Great memories. Great memories. Yeah. We still have 2 more talks. We're running a little late, and I apologize for that. You know, these guys get up here. I'm tempted to give them the hook, but you know, I'd be in trouble for that, wouldn't I? Yeah. So I wanted to have you to have a little more knowledge, particularly for those of you who flew in here or drove here to be in Winterton, to know a little bit about the architecture of the house, the Saltbox house, and the roof line and everything. And Grant Tucker is going to educate us a little bit. And I've asked him to try and keep it within 10 minutes. Let's see how well he does. Come up here, Grant, and get started. Okay.
Okay, it's an entry from the parish records in Stonebridge, England. It's in Dorset in 1766. And it's an entry in the accounts of the parish of the church. And it says, coat, breeches, shirt for Betty Tuck's son going to Newfoundland. 13 shillings, 10 pence. Now, what does that evoke? We have a young fellow in England about to travel to Newfoundland, and he has to be provided with clothes. by the welfare system to come to Newfoundland. So he gets to Newfoundland and he sees, compared to England, which had poverty, every piece of land was owned by somebody. You couldn't step off the road onto a piece of land unless it's somebody's property. So when he gets to Newfoundland, he's faced with a land flowing with milk and honey, really. So, can you see that?
Tilt.
That's called a tilt.
Yeah.
Now, I think that's the first salt box house that was constructed. Now, a salt box, of course, is named because it was a place outside the fishing stages near the wharves where they would store salt, you see. It was a box with a lid, and you could lift the lid up and close it. And I suspect in most cases it had leather hinges on it, and the salt was stored there. No doubt they used bark to cover the lid to keep the water from getting in at the salt. Okay, so the first habitations, you might say, that I've been made aware of in Newfoundland, and probably Betty Tuck's son coming over, deciding to stay, perhaps deserting, but wants to stay rather than go back to poverty and disease and everything else. And he erects a tilt. And the tilt is made of upright sticks, you see. On the roof, which is slanted, tilted, we have tree bark covered with sods. The sods are probably weighed down with rocks as well. Keep it on. That was the dwelling that the pioneer settlers lived in when they came. And as I say, some of the pioneer settlers were deserters because originally the British government wouldn't allow any wouldn't allow any captain to leave any seamen in Newfoundland. You had to bring them all back home. And the idea, of course, was to keep the population out of Newfoundland so the West Country merchants would have control over the fish. All right? But when they get to Newfoundland, they decide to set up. And this is how they began. Now, that's a reproduction of a tilt, which a friend of mine, Michael Holmes, drew under my direction. And my directions came from Uncle Ern Green, who can recall seeing tilts up around his ducks up there, okay? They were still standing when he was a boy. And he said he used to go and take the moss and smoke the moss, right? Because to seal against weather, they would stud moss, you see, between the sticks. I think sand was probably used on floor, but we can't be sure because most of this is just an enigma. So you might say the tilt is the first salt box house. Okay, does everybody recognize that house? It's the psychedelic shack. That's the house that was up the lane up there. If you go up there where Larry Han has got his garage built now, that's where this house stood, okay? Now that's a true salt box. What happens is this belonged to William Tucker. William Tucker was born in 1829. He was the son of Robert, the oldest son. Robert was the pioneer. And he built this house, we don't know when, but likely probably around 1850 or 1860. Now, the steep slope, of course, was occasioned. The reason why they had the steep slope is that because they had to use wood shingles. Okay? Now, I got a pickle trunk here. I think I might be able to find. Okay. And now these are two wood shingles that came off that house. What happened as you can see, the house, the roof is covered with felt there, of course, and tarred, right? But when they started to tear the house down, the original house was this here. As the family expanded, of course, you'll have to forgive my voice cracking. I've been around through museums and cemeteries and what else with tourists the last little while, and I think I'm gonna lose it before the day is out. But anyway, so the original part of the house was this here. As the family expanded, they built on. Now, the steep roof tells me that it's likely before 1870 because they had to use wood shingles. Now, first, these shingles were chopped, you see? Notice how you have a thick edge, you have a thin edge. And they were applied to the house, much like shingles are today. Okay, so when they tore the house down there a few years ago, I was talking to the fellow who was doing the demolition, and I said, now when you tear off this roof here, you're probably going to find underneath wood shingles. Sure enough, when they tore the roof off, here were the original wood shingles. Now, these shingles were done over with cod liver oil twice a year to preserve, right? Now you can see that these shingles here have traces of tar because felt and tar became available probably in the latter part of the 1800s, probably around 1880 or thereabouts. So then they, rather than using cod oil, they used tar. So that's why you see the tar on the ends. So twice a year was done with cod oil. Now that's a true salt box house you have there.
Okay.
Okay, now what do we have next? Okay, so the family lived in the house. So you see the reason for the expansion. That was John William Tucker, who was the son of William Tucker, who built the house. He built the house. And John William, of course, was his son. This is his family. This picture around 1900. And I know in the records, provincial records, John William is listed as a pauper, you know. But when you look at the family and the clothing, they look to be pretty well dressed, don't they? Now, what's the reason for that? Well, they had a lot of relatives in the States, in the Boston States, they call it. And clothes were sent home in barrels. And this probably accounts for their good dressing. Okay, now there is a diagram which outlines the development of the salt box house. And you see the reason for the sloping roof was because they had to use wood shingles and they needed the rain to run off rapidly. Okay, the second generation is here, and the third generation and the fourth generation is the house like we have here. Now, I believe this house one time had a steep roof and it was cut down to a flat roof, you see? So this is the house flattened the roof because felt became available, tar became available, and people probably could afford it where they couldn't afford it before. So they flattened the roof. And they named this for some reason a biscuit box house. Now, I don't know why they call it a biscuit box, but I have an idea that during that time, Uncle John Green, the story had there, when they get biscuits come from the Fury factories, they will be in boxes, you see, nailed together. I recall Uncle John A. out there with a hammer, opening up a box of biscuits from Purity factories. And of course, the board was left over from these boxes was sort of scrounged by people and used to sheet up the inside part of their house because it was nice flat boards, only short. And then of course on top of the boards, they put the sheeting paper, which was a hard paper, before they put on the finish wallpaper. Okay, now there's a salt box house over on the point. You see that?
Yeah.
It's got the original steep slope, but the annex has a low slope. And the reason for that is because by the time the annex was added, felt and tar had become available and they use it. Now that's another biscuit box house, similar to the house we have here now. There's Tom's house here, Google image before he did the renovations. Sawing boards for building houses. This is the pit saw. Okay, just platforms erected in the woods. This is the most basic model. This one's a little more sophisticated, but that's how they cut their lumber. And there's another picture, of course, in color of two people cutting lumber. Okay, there's another salt box house, which has both sections having a steep roof. So there's another one. Okay, and I think the last thing I'm going to say, there, 10 minutes gone, Tom?
Yeah.
Okay.
Cover with the hook.
The last thing I'm going to say is they would paint them. Let me hold this. Okay, hold on. They would paint them with red ochre.
Yeah.
Okay, that's red ochre.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they used to mix this with cod oil, grind it up very finely, and apply it to the house. Now, the Indians use this as well to paint their bodies.
Yeah.
So they were called the Red Indians. And I'm going to leave that there. Also got some plastic bags.
We're gonna paint our faces.
So you can take a sample if you want for a souvenir, okay? Okay, now this color here is a yellow ochre. Now this ochre here is found in Ochre Pit Cove,
Yeah, over Broad Cove.
over
near us.
across the bay.
Yeah.
When I was a boy, I painted fishing sheds with ochre. We didn't use cod oil to mix it. We used linseed oil, which you buy in the store. I recall painting fishing sheds with that. Okay. So I think that's about all.
Okay, great. Thank
I'm
you,
losing
Grant.
my voice.
Yeah, no, so we got one more talk, but last but not least, now he's not from Winterton himself, but we've kind of adopted him, Jerome Ganning. He's a great resource to the Newfoundland Labrador Wooden Boat Museum, Boat Building Museum. And I asked Jerome, I've gotten to know him quite well over the last few years, to tell us a little bit about the boat building here in Winterton as well. Because that truly was a skill that our ancestors had. And you definitely have that skill and you're passing it on to others. A wonderful thing to be doing. Thank you, Jerome.
Thanks, Tom. And thanks to Tom and Gail for putting up with me for the last 3 years. I really appreciate it. I also like to thank Melvin. I wouldn't have came down here in the first place if it wasn't for Melvin and Fred, but you came over to Placentia at the time. And
Melvin and Frank.
Yeah, Melvin and Frank came over, but it was Fred too.
Fred said, you got to go and see this.
That's right. Yeah. So really, it's the Green family that brought me to Winterton. And I got to get this right. Winter.
That's right.
Winter. Okay. So it's taken me 13 years to mispronounce it still. But I'm going to talk to you about, before going, Melvin showed you a 3 sticks, the adjustable mold method of building boats. I had to say this to all of you Greens. These sticks bind you. Every one of you people here, you're part of the Greens. They're the binding symbol of the people who came over. Those sticks built the first boat that gave the first Greens their living in this community. So when you take a look at that stick and you hold them, you will know that each one of your grandparents, okay, in particular your grandfathers, all held those sticks and pondered their shape to give them a boat, to give their families a living, food, and who you become today. I think it'd be only appropriate before the evening's out, before you leave here, to hold them, because they're incredible value to you as a group of people. That's a fact.
I better go get them again. You
That's
That's true, yeah.
The Wooden Boat Museum is across the street here. Doing good?
Yeah.
And I think all your people are going to come here to go over there more. So I'm going to try to keep it as brief as possible. But you know, being a Newfoundlander, you don't have to be from Winterton to talk too much. That's a trait of all of us Newfoundlanders. Okay, so I'm going to try to go against that trait, be very brief in my presentation. You can see. So this little boat here is a punt similar to all the punts that are built, not just in Winterton, but pretty much all over Newfoundland, Labrador. And a punt is a wonderful boat, and they're only little small boats. All of our people all went out just out here as in outer bays, and that's how they made a living in 16-foot, 18-foot boats. And this is an example that, even though that's a much smaller one, is actually a model that we built for a cooperative corporation in St. John's. Anyway, what we do, we archive and we save all the stories. The stories that we're sharing here this evening, these are stories that we, through documentation and learning, we take these stories and we relate them all back to the people who visit our museum. We really make an effort to represent the people of Newfoundland, Labrador through all the same stories that you're talking about now. But in particular, we focus on that aspect of our common heritage, and that's the boat and fishing. So we try to maintain that and be true to it as we possibly can. So Melvin and some probably Grant and other people here, I'm not sure who, but they're the ones, they gave everything. They started the Winterton Community Museum. Is that right, Melvin?
Winterton Boat Building Museum.
It was always that. Okay, so
It was not Newfoundland. Now it's changed.
now it's changed to Wooden Boat Museum, Newfoundland, Labrador. But it started off here in Winterton through people like him. But in particular, people like him needed people like you, because people opened their doors to their stores and sheds, stages, and brought out all the artifacts and stories that began this museum. And we're very grateful over there to this day for that. So it's a big thank you to this community, and you guys are all part of that big community here. So I'm the boat builder, but I'm an interpreter too. We have a good staff. Every year the staff changes. We have typically a manager, assistant manager, the boat builder, interpreter, and we have young boys and girls, mostly from the community and the neighboring communities of Hants Harbor, or that will come. They're usually high school students or first or second year university, and they will work there for 1 or 2 or 3 years, and they become good interpreters. Usually takes them a while because they are young. They're usually, that's their first job, and we coach them through it and encourage them, because we're just like a boat, you're sort of launching them into their lives, right? So we're sort of a little tender with them, besides the smacking back of the head every now and then. Try to keep the old ways going too. No, I'm only joking. But what you're looking at here, the old boats of Winterton, and I really can get caught up in this. The other reason I came here is actually because of a boat. Sammy Andrews, and I'm sure some of the people here would know Uncle Sammy Andrews. I think that his boat is a gunning boat, was known here locally as a 4-oar punt. The Hungry Month of March was mentioned here in an early conversation, and that boat was put out in that time of the year because you had to get out the boat and get a seal because people were hungry. The vegetables were rotten in their cellars, or we ran out of them. And when I saw Uncle Sammy Andrews' boat, I said, if people of this community built such a beautiful boat, I'd like to know more about this community and the boats that took place. But because we represent not just the northeast coast, I'm a Central Bayman from the island of Mirchanal, and but we represent everybody. But in particular, you can see up here, there's a number of different boats, and down here in this corner here, there's a flat bottom boat, which you'll see them more when you go over to the museum, or if you ever visit the museum. Is a flat bottom dory boat. That's a boat that's very common where I grew up, and that's when you guys talk about going around in your punts. We had them, but we also had the dory. The Wooden Boat Museum is not only about preserving the heritage of boats, but all those skills that are in that. People haven't got a clue what an as is. As stuck in the head with one, but I might have caught myself many times with those things. But we teach heritage skills. The sadness about wooden boats is that it's dead. It's no industry anymore, and there's only people like me, and there is a small avenue left for people who can have it as an alternative skill to other skills to have. They may be heritage carpentry, they may be a historian or an architect, and they'll pick up some skills like that. But really, it's going to be few and far between, and that's one of the things that shows the importance of this museum. We will remember it, and we'll always have someone skilled there that can actually build a boat. And we have, with that said, a big component of the Wooden Boat Museum is actually children's workshops. You know, you're talking about floating a boat in this little brook here. Well, we do that. We carve out a rough shaped little boat, put a sail on a string, and the children go down there. And yeah, it's excellent. And they're fun. They're wild, I tell you. For a lot of the kids, they're city kids, probably from up along, and when they see, you know, just the outdoors, being in the outdoors without worries is quite special to these kids. Anyway, we take care of the children. They're first and foremost in our Wooden Boat Museum.
And you let girls sail them too, do you?
Girls dominate. They win. They rule. Yeah. No, we encourage. That's because boat building is basically a male tradition, and it's some of the it's a challenge for us as Wooden Boat Museum to bring women in. It's happening elsewhere because what we're doing here in Winterman is happening all over the world. People are losing their heritage, their skills, especially in maritime countries. And the Wooden Boat Museum that's here is reflected everywhere in England, the United States, Western Canada, but all along the sea, because they recognize how important it is, the boat is to the community. Huh?
Multitasking.
Anyway, loads of stuff go on. We have lots of workshops. Every weekend, we have a workshop on an aspect of boat building. We have tons of things happening that we encourage people in the community. Melbourne them come over to play some music. Anyway, it's a great place to be fun. So when they come in, they have to walk by our exhibits. They have to learn about our heritage. So we try to be active because there's lots of skills that in the community that we really show off. But at the same time, we're always niggling in the boat building aspect of it and the heritage of that. Now, what do I got? Oh, yes, a documentation program, very important. It's slowed down right now. COVID has put a shag to almost everything. You know, everything got slowed down for about 3 years. The COVID has dominated, but we had one of the most wonderful programs that the museum could do, and it's that Melvin's on our board here, by the way. So they okayed and found funding, which is the brilliance of our board, because I don't know how you manage it year after year. This is my 13th year down there, and I still can't believe that I'm still coming back. But they find funding, and they find funding for anywhere around 3 to 4 to 5 months, some years even longer. And anyway, the documentation program took us out of Winterton and brought us to other communities where everywhere in Newfoundland, Labrador. We ended up in Northern Labrador, actually recording native boats. So on the West Coast, the West Coast Dory. On the South Coast, the Swamps boat. In the Fogo gunning boat on Fogo Island. We recorded all of them. They're archived and in our museum or a dream at Memorial University, our common ground of sharing the DIA. Okay, what do we got here now? I can't read it.
We're back to the beginning.
And we got a web page. Yeah, we got a web page and all that kind of stuff. You know, www. And go on it. It's really fun. Okay, if you have any interest in boats, it's great. But it's also the boat builders. The stories you're telling here are the stories of boat builders. And the stories of boat builders are not just the woods, but their families and this kind of stuff. And I had to say, John Reed intrigued me. I had to say the name before, the John Reed, who I started about a month ago trying to figure out who was this boat builder, John Reed. Michelle is here. Michelle, you're the granddaughter?
Hey.
I tell you, before the night is over, please talk to her about her father, John Reed, as your fathers are, and all this kind of stuff. But I went over and spent some time with Michelle and Charlie. They shared their stories with me. But good lads, man. Carrying wood on your back. Okay, lads, I'm going to tell you. Their parents, I don't know about your parents, but they used to go way the hell back there, and they needed a piece of plank. They carried it home every day. They were hardworking people. Okay, and that's our webpage. We're soon going to eat everybody. And this is technical. That's just recording boats. And you can see here, taking the lines off in the field, because it's very technical. That's where I come in. But we have Folklore. She's a master's student, and she records the stories, which is wonderful. And you can see here, we're in Labrador here. See all the children. This is in Maine. And right there, we're at the booms. I have a boat at the booms. We took there and there around the south coast. We're all over Newfoundland, and we try to make sure we tell the story of boats from Newfoundland. That's a boat that we build. We build a boat every year. We also, the Wooden Boat Museum, and Melvin can testify to this, who would ever think that wooden boat building is now a course at Memorial University of Newfoundland? It's actually an accredited course at Memorial University of Newfoundland. It makes all the boat builders that I'm sure before me, John Reed included, and your dad would be so proud that we actually are teaching a course called Wooden Boat Building in Newfoundland now. Oh yeah, one of the things, we're always expanding activities to make people aware of what we're doing over there. So we have a new venture this year is an activity center. So we can take some of the technical aspects of boats and just show them, you know, how they go together without driving them away, okay? Maybe. Still see, I only got a couple more minutes before I drive you away. So we have all the stuff that we do it fairly professionally. We have the stories that are the ordinary people, but we really doctor it up in a way that is appealing through presentation. We have our storybooks and this kind of stuff. They're well thought out, they're colorful, they contain the story, and they're immediate, so you can get them at our museum. And we always are working hard on this side of our presentation. And we partners with everyone, everyone that is a funding agency. You can see in all of this, I'm sure nobody can see unless it's them right there. I couldn't see it either, but basically we're partners with schools, government departments, industry, and we found through partnership, that's the way to move. But anyway, we have a common thing this year.
Yeah.
Other than that,
Wonderful.
That's it.
Thank you, my boy. Yeah, good luck. Fantastic. Okay, so we're all finished with our formal presentations. And we have, for the evening, we've got a wonderful Green family band put together. We'll tell you a little bit more about that when we get her all set up, right, Melvin?
Right on.
Yeah,
And all the people connect with the band, we can't eat. We have to set up.
Oh,
We
Yeah,
can't go eating.
so, well, I don't think the hot food has arrived yet, but you can get up, you can walk around, you can go get your beverages that you brought with you and
And hold on.
look at
to
that.
this.
Yeah,
You gotta take it in your hands, at least.
the food when it's set up will be in the summer kitchen. So go in and get yourself a plate, come out, and by then we hope we'll have started with the music. We've got songbooks for you all, so I want to hear all these beautiful voices from winter. So it should be a lovely evening.
Never land
introduce our Green Family Band that we put together just for this special event. On bass, we have Roger Green.
Made the cut. And then we got Melvin that lives up there in the middle. And we figured we better let him in because he plays the guitar a lot. And then
I paid him actually.
then we
Cost a lot of money.
all right, we got Bob also here on the accordion. Oh, he's not great, but he's the best accordion player in the pack. So we have to take him. On my far right here is my good old son Philip Green Robbins. And I'm Tommy Green. Right. All right.
I thought we had a girl singer in the band. What happened?
Well, she's going to come up here right now, right? We're going to introduce.
go.
We had to take a token woman. I'm getting in trouble now. There's my good wife, Gail, and she's going to join in here. She's our backup. Yeah. Come over here. Yeah, she's our harness. Yeah.
It's been more than a long time that the heavy wind called your mind, and we waited for the sun to shine on a great sunny day. Waiting in the early morning till the sound of the old car door, and we thought the men will return when the boat's in the bay. On the east side, I don't see no more, and the red light of your shore. I was told to keep both on the boat, on the great day. Everybody, summer days they were older then, when we laughed with the old fishermen, and they first went to our own way, and you made up the bay. It's been more than a long, long time since I held you in palm in mine, and we waited for the sun to shine on a gray, foggy day. Way above. to play the tour dance. Wait for people to travel and every time to see the trees and grass. If you park the sound of all, if you park the sound of down, go and make friends all around the circle. Susan White, she's out of sight. And if I want some border, I'll somewhere in the dark. Kiss her in my car. If you park the sound of all, if you park the sound of down, go and make friends all around the circle.
What a day this has been. More than 40 of our friends and relatives showed up today to commemorate these 150 years that this old salt box house has stood the test of time, has provided warmth and protection for generations of family members, and really become an example for preserving the past in this picturesque fishing village of Winterton, Newfoundland. Today we celebrated. We remembered our parents and relatives, the ancestors of multiple generations, the craftsmanship of how they built their houses, their skills at boat building and fishing, without which they could not survive on this island. We celebrated with presentations full of facts and humor, with music, both traditional and contemporary, which really created rhythm and impromptu dancing, and with plenty of food. Many, many thanks go out to our presenters, Judy Green Wells, Carolyn Green LeGros, John Andrews Green, Frank Green, Melvin Green, Grant Tucker, and Jerome Cannon. Accolades go out to our musicians. Essie Green on the pump organ, Sarah Green Robbins Pennington for the invocation prayer song, and the impromptu Green Family Band featuring Melvin Green, Roger Green, Bob Balsam, Philip Green Robbins, yours truly, Tommy Robbins, Tommy Green Robbins, and Gail Woodson. Many thanks to our food caterers as well. Just like Sisters and City Cove Foodery did this, they truly outdid themselves. We wish to convey our appreciation also to Doris and Harold Harnum for their floral presentations, and to the family of the late Ted Woodin for the donation of his homemade wooden wheelbarrow. Last, but definitely not the least, a special thanks to my better half, Gail Woodson, and with targeted help from Herb Choquette, for providing the technical audiovisual support during the ceremony and afterwards for producing this recording. My final thoughts as we reflect back on the events of July 16th are really ones that convey a sense of accomplishment. The restoration of the family house, for example. The closer ties between cousins and friends. The documentary of a typical Newfoundland outport ancestral heritage. And a strong sense of pride for who we are and where we came from. We hope this day will have long-lasting effects, not only for our family, but for the community as a whole. To this effect, we have initiated the creation of the Green Family Group on Facebook, which is now beginning to bring on board even more members of the family. Additionally, this video recording itself will be made available on the Green Family site, as well as the Winterton Facebook site. So long for now, and may God bless you all.